Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Happy New Year. In this video we're going to be discussing Campervan 12 volt electrics. So let's roll the intro and get into it. Start with these electrics then. So one of the first key things is decide what use case your van is. Now I'm going to be basing today's video on my own van, which we use regularly for a weekend, 3-4 day camping trips, and then extended period camping trips when the weather's a bit better during the summer, so a week, 10 days, maybe up to 2 weeks. So this system will be ideally based for that. And of course, budget in mind is always key. So we're going to try and do it for the least amount of money possible to give you exactly what you need. So when building my own van, it was decided that for the use case I've described earlier in the video, then really we would need 12 volt only. So no inverters, no 240 volt, because we're UK, devices required. There just isn't it. So what we needed was lighting, TV, Wi-Fi, fridge, and plenty of USB charging points for laptops, devices, phones, and all that sort of thing. So that's how it's based. Okay, so what we're going to need for this 12 volt system only. So I've made a little PowerPoint presentation slide. It's all pretty primitive, excuse me for that. But it's got listed the main components, and we'll go through each of them in detail. Now, they've got a solar panel there. We've got a DC to DC and MPPT charge control unit, which is the real star of the show. The van battery itself, and the leisure battery. So as I said, the star of the show really is this DC to DC controller, which also has got a solar input or MPPT controller built in. Now this is the core of your system. So basically what this device does, and there's other ones on the market too, but I'll link in the description below for this particular one. So this sits in between your leisure battery, your van battery, and your solar, and it then is in charge of, well, distributing the charge. So it smartly controls your solar input to make sure your battery is topped up the best it can be, either while you're driving the van or the vehicle itself, or via solar if you're stationary. One upside with this one as well is you can actually feed the solar back to your van battery. So if it's trickle charging your leisure battery and it's at pretty much capacity, it will top up the van battery as well if situations do allow. So it's a very clever bit of kit, and it's really fundamental for how this system works. And I've got this one installed myself, and I'll show you that in a little bit. There's also monitoring options for this as well, it's important to say. Now there's two main ones. There's a Bluetooth module, which means you can look up the stats on your phone and see what's happening with the battery and stuff, or there's like a physical display unit. Each of them plug into the side of the unit itself. Now I've got the Bluetooth one. I have to say, it's a bit of a mistake. I think I probably should have had the display one, because the Bluetooth one, the app isn't great, basically. It does report all the information, but the app is not the best, I have to say. So those two things. But this device here is the fundamental part of the system. So our second core component here is the solar panel. I've gone for a Renogy, and mine's a 200 watt panel. It's a single fixed frame panel, and it's attached to the roof of the van. And then it's fed into the Renogy charge controller, which we've seen on the last image. And now you can add more of these, add them in series or parallel, depending on your electrical system. But as we discussed, for the use of my van in particular, and I would imagine for a lot of people's use in van that aren't living in the van full time, then it's surprising actually how much power you can gain back from just one single 200 watt panel. I'll give you an example. When we was away on our summer holiday, I'd recently installed the fridge, which you may have seen in other videos when I put the fridge in the van. Now this was running sort of 24/7 with a current draw of around about 4 amps, so quite low, very very good. Kept all our food good, or our milk and our other stuff that needs chilling was all absolutely fine. And there was never a scenario, even when we had overcast and rainy days, where by the end of the evening, the van battery, or the leisure battery should I say, got down to a point of about 50% charge reporting. And then the following morning, if it was bright, usually the leisure battery were reporting a charge of around 95% by about 8-9 o'clock. That's before we've driven anywhere. And of course, with that charge box, if you're driving as well, that will also charge up the battery. Now, batteries is an interesting one that I mulled over quite a lot, whether to have one or two, whether to have AGM or spend much more money on a lithium battery because they last longer and all this. And in the end, I decided the price versus my expected use of the battery, then I couldn't really not start out with a lead acid battery like the one very similar to the one you see on the screen now. So mine is 130 amp hour. It cost about £100 in comparison to an AGM, probably about 300-400. And I'm not saying that this battery is better than any of those batteries, because it just isn't, and it won't last as long. It will need changing probably before any of those other batteries run out of use or go wrong or whatever the scenario is. I mean, there's a 5-year warranty on them generally. And I started out with one because I thought, well, actually doing the maths, I had to double check it a few times, but it would seem that would be enough to do what I wanted to do. And so it's proven. As I discussed earlier, I've been away for 2 weeks at a time with the fridge running the whole time, charging up stuff, lights, TV, mobile internet, etc. And the battery levels never drop below 50% on 50% charge over a day cycle, even with sort of overcast weather and not a lot of driving. So it made sense for me. I mean, I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying that they're the best batteries in the world, but I've got flexibility there. I could add a second one if I needed to. One thing I probably should say is the charge controller itself is capable of charging any of those types of batteries I've just listed. You set that up when you unbox it and set it up and tell it what type of battery it's got. So DC isolators, now these are pretty key to the system. When I go back to the original presentation slide at the beginning, you'll be able to see them and where I've placed them in the system. But just to tell you, I've got one enabled to isolate the solar panels from the charge controller, and one able to isolate the van battery from the charge controller too. I think it's important, if you need to work on these systems, you'll be able to easily turn them off in a situation where you needed to do that. So the correct fusing is obviously a key component to getting your system up and running safely and securely. So I opted for this style of inline switchable trip fuse, I suppose you would call it. I mean, links will be in the description for all the products anyway, and that may not exactly be the right term. But basically, you can see there from the diagram, you feed the cable, it sits in between or in line of the cable, so one cable entry goes in either end. There's a fused amount, so you can see they come in usually 20, 30, 40 and 50 amp varieties. But they've also got a little isolator there, so it's really handy to be able to just push the little red button and it pops the little handle up, and then you know the system itself, the circuit is then broken, enabling you to work on it or to test some components or whatever. They're a nice little compact unit, do two jobs in one, so I'm a big fan of them, so I've put them in. But like I said, when we go back to the original presentation slide, you'll see where they sit in the whole system. If you're enjoying the video, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. Thanks for all the recent support. So if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Now back to the video. So going back to the original slide. Now I've explained some of the components there. Hopefully my rather crude drawing will explain exactly what's going on. You can see in the isolators there that I've got in line. There's actually an isolator the other side of the van battery as well, which I didn't pop in. But the fuse things are in there. Now those are the fundamental parts of your system. That just means that you've got the ability to isolate if you need to. But you've also got the smart control of the DC controller unit, which is going to give you so much more flexibility in your system. So what I've displayed there is basically the way to get 12 volt power to your in your van and to your batteries and charge your batteries, etc., etc. What I haven't got into is actually supplying power out to all your devices, and obviously that's a case-by-case basis. I'm quite happy to do a video on my own setup and discuss that further, but this was really just to show the core components of being able to charge your leisure battery and make sure you've got some monitoring and it's in safely And of course, again, we're doing it at a budget, so cost is king on this for our use case anyway. So I'm just going to touch on it briefly, and I'm by no means an expert on this subject at all. And there's plenty of really, really good in-depth detailed videos out on YouTube, so you can spreadsheet away to your heart's content. But I just want to touch on cable size and fusing for your devices. So you really try to keep it simple with this. Your device power, your cable and your fuse all need to work in harmony to protect themselves. So if your device draws 5 amps, you need a cable that's capable of drawing 10 amps. Therefore, that's acceptable. The device will never overheat the cable because the cable is capable of drawing 10 amps. That's great. But what do you do about fusing? So you need to protect the cable in the situation where you might be drawing close to 10 amps. So then you would fuse that cable, or the fuse size for that cable, and it's kind of like a theoretic sort of thing, would perhaps be 8 amps would be your fuse. So your device draws 5 under normal circumstances, everything's happy days. You've got a fuse at 8, and you've got a cable capable of 10, which means the cable is more than man enough supplying that 5 amps all day long without heating up, or excessively heating up anyway, or in danger of overloading its cable. And if you do approach that threshold, the fuse should step in and blow at 8 amps. So that's just a really basic example of when you're sizing out devices that you're going in, TVs, fridges, whatever else it is. You need that core information. You need the amperage of the device. You need to decide what cable would comfortably supply that amount of amperage to it, and then a fuse that's lesser, that's lower rated than the cable to protect the cable. So you need to protect the cable at all times. So those are the fundamental things. I mean, I can go into, in fact, I've been thinking about doing another video on my own devices in my own van, and exploring that side of it. So that's something that we could definitely do if there's interest in that. Okay, so let's discuss what it actually costs to do what's in the diagram. This is budget based, and like I said earlier in the video, is based on us, perhaps 2 weeks away at the most, no 240 volt elements to the system at all. This is purely, but like I said, I don't think you need it. You can charge pretty much anything via USB now, USB-C. There's DC jacks in the van as well. You got gas cookers and stuff for hot drinks and things like that. So for us, it wasn't really an issue. Versus the cost of putting 240 hookup in and 240 inverter and all the extra cabling and all bits and pieces that are involved in that, it really wasn't worth the justification. In fact, we had it in one of our old vans. I had a Mercedes Vito a few years back, and I had a 240 hookup with a couple of sockets, and really the only thing I ever used it for was to trickle charge the leisure battery off the mains when I was on site. So for us, no. So just looking at the components there again, you can see them up on the screen. So I'll go through some of the costs of what this system cost me to do. I mean, I was doing the labour, but yeah. So the solar panel itself was £179. I think the latest prices from Renogy on the UK site, that is. This is all in pounds, but I think you can get them pretty much anywhere in the world. And I'll put links down below in the description for all the products and the websites and stuff we use. Now, the DC to DC controller, which is, like I said, the fundamental key to all this system actually working, is actually a very reasonable £220 at the moment. I've got the 30 amp version. You can get a bigger version, but I think it's a 50. But a 30 amp was perfectly fine for me. That's £220. I think that's pretty good value. You've got the leisure battery itself. Like I said, I mean, batteries are a thing. I'm not, like I said earlier in the video, I'm in no way saying that lead acid batteries are better or whatever else. But you can't argue from, in our scenario, keep that in mind, in our scenario, you can't argue with the price versus performance ratio. And that battery came in to me at about £100, and I got it from Tanya Batteries, which is a common place that people order batteries from in the UK. But it's a standard size battery. That's one of the other things I probably didn't say earlier on. Because it's such a common size of battery, a 110 or a 130, like with everything, the more they make them, the cheaper they are. So if you went for, I did look at maybe getting two 110s or two 130s versus a 240 or 230, I think is a common size. Because it's manufactured in much lower numbers, those batteries actually more money than buying two separate batteries. And I didn't really want to do two batteries unless I needed to. So it made sense for me to start with that battery. But like I said, that battery comes in with a 5-year warranty, about £100 delivered in the UK. It should be similar elsewhere around the world. Unbelievable value in my opinion. Yeah, perfect. So the little trip fuses next. Let's talk about those up in the top right-hand corner. The top left-hand corner. You can see I've scattered them around all over the place on the diagram. They come in about £9 each, and you can buy them in different amperages depending on your system. Clearly, like I said earlier, the DC charger in my case is 30 amps, so the one sitting between the van battery and the DC controller is a 40 amp. So again, what I was saying, the cable I used for that is a 60 amp cable. So back to what I was saying earlier. So the cable, the load is 30 or potentially 30 amps, up to, it's not always. The cable is capable of drawing 60 amps and the fuse is set to draw 40. So if something goes wrong, the fuse will trip before the cable melts, which is what you want. So yeah, I mean, good value for money. They seem to work fine. I've not had any dud ones. I've just bought a big pack of them all at the same time to do various different things. Excellent stuff. And just the DC isolators left down there on the right. There's the swivel kind of rotating, knob switches to isolate your solar panel and anything else you want to isolate really. But they're coming in at about £15 each, and they're Amazon again, and I'll put links below for all those bits and pieces. It's well worth having. I mean, you could use, may not have the isolator like that. You could use another one of the fuse switches, I suppose. But it felt right having a physical dunk isolator for that purpose. And like I said, I'll put a little video clip of actually mine in the van working towards the end of the video so you can see it there. So anyway, rounding up all of that, so we've basically got leisure battery, solar panel in, cables. Oh, I didn't add cables actually. So for adequate cabling, I've allowed, let me see, consult my list. So I've allowed £50 for adequate lengths of cables. Obviously that will differ depending on where your batteries are located and how you've laid it out inside your own van, but I think £50 easily covered the amount of cable I had to use for that, so don't forget that. So anyway, that brings us to the total. So the total in my case was £579, which I think is very reasonable for what you get. Like I said, I've had no power issues at all the power required, and I think it's coming in at a bargain price. So there we have on screen. That's my own setup as discussed, as in the diagram. You'll recognise those components there, the DC isolators, the trip fuse switches there to the left-hand side of the DC charge controller, and the charge controller itself it's well. There's some other components there as well, some buzz bars and some blade fuse boxes. But like I said, we can discuss all that in another video. So there we have an understanding of how I've put the 12-volt power into my van and the components I've used to do it at what I think is a extremely competitive budget for what you're getting. I didn't cover devices that are connected to that system in this video. I would like to do a video on that if there's interest to do that, and I can use my own van as a basis again. And we'll go into a bit more detail about amps drawn, fusing that and cabling and all those other bits and pieces. If that's something everyone would like to see, then if it is, just let me know down below in the comments and I'll do that for you, no problem at all. But thanks for joining me. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.